And now I'm a revenue strategy trainee, and I'm a part of commercial revenues and really been focused on developing partnerships for the 2023 Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand, which I'll also add, even though from the accent clearly American, I'm also half Australian. So really excited that the
Oh, wow.
tournament will be there next year. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it feels like you've experienced everything within the game, from a player to a referee to a physio to a supporter. And I suppose it'd be interesting to hear more a little bit about what the FIFA Masters entails. I mean, it's a lot of people have done master's degrees and been through universities, but I suppose that name FIFA is slightly different to a normal university experience. Yeah. So how did that work, and what was the type of journey you went through over there?
Yeah, for me, the FIFA Masters was perfect because it really helped me make that transition from the skills and professional experience I had in the Midwest of the US, and then bridging that gap into the world of international sports, which is where I wanted to be. I mean, I love the US sports, but I love the international side of the Olympic movement, FIFA. And so that's where I wanted to end up. And the FIFA Masters is really cool because it gives us a great, holistic, we're going to talk a lot about holistic approaches today, but you start in Leicester, England, and you get into the history and humanities of sport. So how did football and cricket and rugby, how did all of those things start to where we got to them today? And then we go to Bocconi in Milan, Italy, and do the management sides. We have finance exams, which were quite daunting for a lot of us, but marketing, technology, and sport, etc. And then we finish off things in Neuchâtel, Switzerland, and do sports law and a lot of sports governance and good governance. And along the way, you get field visits to, all the different clubs or sports teams that are in that area. So unfortunately, I did it during a COVID year, so a lot of our visits were online. But we got to have virtual visits with Manchester City, Wimbledon, Ferrari, Inter. Oh, wow. And then once we're in Switzerland with FIBA, UEFA, FIFA, even guest speakers from the Equestrian Federation. So really up and down throughout the sports ecosystem, which is neat. And then the highlight is definitely the students. So we were 25 students, and we experienced this wild, every 3 months moving to a different country. So it was 25 of us with 22 different nationalities. So pretty unique group of people to be a part of, which is a highlight for me for sure. This research was done during the FIFA Masters, and I did it with 3 other group mates. So Thomas Grimm, Diana Iona, and Lorenzo Mazzone. And I mean, I came in wanting to look into women's sports in general because it is really, we're on the precipice of something great. And also it's an area that's super understudied, just women's sports in general, women's physiology, these things, there's not a lot of research about it. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity for us to really give back. And especially just thinking of myself, I said earlier, I'm a product of Title IX, and I would not be where I was if I didn't have plentiful opportunities to play sports and build that confidence and all that other great stuff. So I think contributing back and using the Masters as an opportunity to contribute to the dialogue was really interesting to me. And just knowing that there's so much that can be done. It's really your investment is going to get you so far within the women's sports. So I was always keen, it had to be a women's football or women's sports related project. And then as we were doing our studies, we learned that there's a huge discrepancy in the number of matches national teams are playing. And so that just became really interesting. And we were learning about competitive balance and how important that is to a league or a product of a competition that, in the US, we say on any given Sunday, any team can win. And that really creates an exciting product. FIFA competitions, Confederation, any official football match is going to be documented here. And so you can see there's a huge range. You have USA, who won the 2019 World Cup, winning 85 matches. And there's several reasons for this. I mean, it's a hugely successful team, lots of support back home. If you're winning a World Cup, you're playing more matches than someone who lost in the group stage. And after you win, you go home, you have a celebration tour. So that's just going to keep tacking on matches. And interesting, the case of the USA, the women actually played more matches than the men in their 4-year cycle. Of course, the US men's team didn't make it to the World Cup, so they're going to automatically lose 3 group stage matches, any preparation friendlies and the like. But after the USA, then you go down 21 matches to South Africa, playing 64, and you can see there's a lot of countries in that 50, 60 range, which is probably a nice place to be. Italy, Germany, Australia are very solid nations. And then we drop off into the 30s, and these are kind of more upstart teams. Like, I think Jamaica's a great example. Bob Marley's granddaughter, I believe it is, was like, why don't we have a women's football team? So she poured a lot of her own personal money to get Jamaica off the ground and get a team, and they qualified to their first World Cup, and they're playing well right now in the CONCACAF W Championship. And then you see this really sad drop off to countries just playing 12 matches in 4 years, 5 matches, 2 matches, no matches in the case of Armenia. And over a 4-year period, like, that's really astounding. So how do we go from 0 to 85? And then, Armenia wouldn't stand a chance against the USA. Talk about 13-0 or 20-0 with England a few years ago. I mean, this would be really not good. And even when you think of like India with 33 matches going up against Italy with 57. So I think this was like the moment that our group got really excited about this project and wanting to look in deeper of really, why is this? Why are some nations playing so many more matches than others? What are going to be the obstacles, and how can we pinpoint obstacles? I wanted to know, why are some nations playing more matches than others, and really keep it to that senior international level. We can also talk about this at the youth level. As your U15, U17, U20s, how often are they playing? What does your pipeline look like? There are so many ways to take this, but we really decided to narrow it down. And we chose 44 KPIs across 5 categories. We wanted to be super holistic and not just think about what's happening within the 4 lines of the pitch or in the coaching staff or in the training room. What's really going on within a country, within a region, in a culture that could be impacting women's football. And power distance specifically measures the role that hierarchy plays in a society and how accepting people are of that hierarchy. So, Australia is a great example. It's a very flat society. You don't call your boss sir or Mr. or boss. You just use their first name. And there's not, senior and junior. Those lines are very blurred. Versus you look at Honduras, Armenia, Bhutan, hierarchy is really important. There's a lot of respect that goes up to your elders, to the people above you. And so this was a really interesting indicator. And as we looked at the numbers, I think it really started to click for me that being a part of women's sports and women's football, you kind of have to go against the status quo. It's not generally accepted in most places, and you have to really fight to be on the field, to have time with your team, to be able to schedule matches. And so if the USA, as an example, has a very low power distance score, so the hierarchy doesn't play as much of a role, and people feel like they can really go up against the hierarchy, go up against the status quo, and challenge the status quo to get the results that they desire. And so I think that's where we're seeing this group of countries kind of here in the middle left of the graph. They were willing to be pioneers and put up the good fight and challenge the existing way of doing things so that their women's team could be successful. And then you move to the right side, where power distance and hierarchy plays a more important role. And this also means that collectivism within a society is even more important. And so wanting to make sure that what you do as an individual is going to be best on behalf of the larger group, and wanting to please everyone and not stick out too much. That also plays a role here. So huge cultural differences that we're seeing. Like, there's a pretty clear split here through the middle of the graph of countries that have lower power distance and are playing more versus countries where people don't want to stick out so much. They don't want to challenge authority potentially as much within that culture, and we're seeing fewer matches as part of that. How much does a culture or society accept LGBT individuals? And the quote that brought about looking into this KPI was a parent telling someone, "I don't want my daughter to play soccer because it will turn her gay." And this is like a really damaging stereotype for football, for girls, for the LGBT community, because that's just not true. But if that's the misconception that parents are having, then they're never going to enroll their daughter in sport because they don't see it as acceptable for young girls. And so we wanted to look at LGBT acceptance. And again, we're seeing countries in this top right, they're more accepting of LGBT communities and individuals, and they're playing more football matches. And then this is, I think, one of the more clear correlations, that when there's less LGBT acceptance, there's fewer matches and less involvement at the national team level. So I think this kind of, it really starts tapping into discrimination that's being at play and what we think as a society is acceptable for young girls and young women, and activities that they can take a part of, and being scared of your daughter being a member of the LGBT community, which should not be the case. But we can see that those underlying cultural acceptances or tolerances do come to the play when it comes to women's sports. What we wanted to do was then compare all of these KPIs against the men's national team as well, because we would assume, okay, if it's hard for a women's team to fly, it's probably also difficult for the men's team to fly, and we should see a correlation in that KPI as well. So just like we did for all of those graphs that we just saw for the women's side, we counted up the number of matches that men played in their own 4-year World Cup cycle ending in 2018, and then plotted them against our KPIs and looked at the correlation factor, or R squared if you're into statistics. And what we found out was that none of these KPIs or obstacles that were present for women were present for men. So if a country had a low GDP per capita, they were still finding ways to organize and pay for their men's national team camps and matches. Same goes for international air connectivity. No matter how hard it was to fly from your island or country, there was still a way for the men's national team to fly to all the matches that they needed to play. Same with power distance and LGBT acceptance. Those socio-cultural factors that we just spoke about really had nothing to do with scheduling men's matches as well. Which really, I think, again, goes into this underlying discrimination, this underlying, there's just a lack of willingness to invest in the women's game in many nations. And this kind of, the status quo is how it is. Sports and football are not appropriate for women. And so we, as the FA or as the national team, as a club, are just not going to put in the resources and the investment to develop women's football. And I'll add here as well that across all of these nations, on average, women's teams played 30% less than their men's counterpart. There were examples where the women's national team played more than the men, but by and large, men's national teams were playing more matches than women's national teams over a 4-year.
What would be the sort of wish for the future of football? And again, in that 5-10 year period, what's the biggest change you'd love to see?
My Australian half wants Australia, the Matildas, to bring home a World Cup. Sam Kerr definitely has shown it. Yeah, I mean, I would love to get to the place where it's not women's football, it's just football, and it can just be appreciated and respected, and you don't have to look at terrible comments on a YouTube highlight or something like that. So, we're starting to see that, just let's put the men's and women's teams side by side on billboards. I think that's super cool when we see that.